Tonight's big stories. Taguig and Makati continue to butt heads over jurisdiction of BGC and several other areas, even though the Supreme Court has already ruled in favor of Taguig. And it seems this latest controversy began with an online post.
Volcanic activity in Mount Mayon could last for a few more months based on historical data. A big concern now is whether there is enough resources to house displaced residents.
And new toll rates for the North Luzon Expressway or NLEX will take effect on June 15. But at least two senators want the rate hike deferred. We'll talk about their arguments later on in the show. Well, welcome to the program. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Sean Yao.
We're going to begin tonight with the Taguig versus Makati story. The headline you just read.
It seems this has been decided on last year, April 2022, but
And
it hasn't
again
been executed
this year.
yet by the Supreme Court.
As well as the DILG, supposedly, according to Makati, no one from the Interior Department has actually ordered them to start the turnover process.
But it's a very convoluted
Nakaka-curious
case.
lang do, ano kaya yung
Sobra.
online post na nag-trigger?
I saw it.
Oo.
I saw it also.
Well, we'll
Medyo
talk about-
marami siyang name
Okay,
drops.
well, let me
Let's
give the
talk
viewers
about
the
this
details first, and then we'll talk about it a bit later on. As we were saying, the Supreme Court has already ruled with finality that Fort Bonifacio belongs to Taguig. But Makati Mayor Abby Binay reopened the controversy when she said in a recent interview that the case was up for a hearing again.
Alright, nagulat rin ako doon. But in turn, Taguig City Mayor Lani Cayetano called Mayor Binay's claims false and troubling and then filed a motion asking the Supreme Court to order Binay to explain why she should not be sanctioned.
This is a case that dates back decades and has major implications for some barangays. Let me bring in Mayan Los Baños for the big story.
In a manifestation filed before the Supreme Court today, the Taguig City government said it wants to put an end to what they consider as fake news surrounding the controversy on the jurisdiction of certain key areas like the Bonifacio Global City and barangays such as Pembo, Sembo, and Comembo. Is it Taguig's or Makati's? Taguig Mayor Lani Cayetano filed today an extremely urgent manifestation before the Supreme Court. The complaint stated that the city of Taguig manifests its grave concern over some information it had received over the past several days from what appears to be a barangay in a disputed area. The online post is said to be urging residents to continue the fight over the disputed areas. The manifestation also called out the post, insinuating that Makati Mayor Abby Binay allegedly talked to President Bongbong Marcos, First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos, and Supreme Court Chief Justice Alexander Hesmundo, who promised to reopen the case on the land dispute over BGC. In the manifestation, the Taguig LGU called out the said online post, which it says is in line with a recent interview of Mayor Binay, who said that the fight for BGC is not yet over. The manifestation claims that in the said interview, Binay said that the Supreme Court has invited them for an oral argument on the said case. Cayetano said Binay gave the impression that she has insider information since Taguig hasn't commented on Makati's motion and it did not receive the supposed order.
Ito ay hindi namin binabaliwala at kinukuha namin ng pagkakataong ito upang hingin sa Supreme Court ang kanilang atensyon at ang kanilang pag-iimbestiga sa nasabing mga post at interview or statements ni Mayor Abby Binay.
In response to the controversy, Mayor Cayetano reiterated that the decision of the Supreme Court's Third Division has ruled with finality last April to quash the omnibus motion for reconsideration of the Makati LGU. The High Court also discarded the Makati LGU's move to appeal the said decision to the SCN Bank. The Supreme Court also made it clear that the said disputed areas are now under the jurisdiction of Taguig.
Napakalinaw ng desisyon ng Korte Suprema at ito'y dapat igalang. Final na ang desisyon ng Korte Suprema tungkol sa kasong ito.
Mayor Binay is now in London to attend the London Tech Week. But according to the city administrator of Makati, this was the first time that they have heard of a petition brought before the SC on the basis of social media posts, which they described as with dubious authorship, accuracy, and credibility. Attorney Claro Certeza said that the allegations against the president, the first lady, and the court are also irresponsible. The city administrator adds that there are no right-thinking lawyers that would petition the High Court on the basis of these posts, yet Taguig has chosen to do so. But they say that if the SC will formally ask the Makati LGU to comment on the matter, they will do so. Reporting for News 5, Mean Los Baños, we are One News.
This turf war between Makati and Taguig actually started in the 90s, and at the center of it all is Fort Bonifacio. Now, a bit of history here. Fort William McKinley was built by the Americans in 1901 in what is then the province of Rizal. This was a large military reservation, portions of which now belong to the cities of Makati, Pasay, Parañaque, Taguig, and Pasig. In 1957, this was named Fort Andres Bonifacio by former President Carlos Garcia. 4 parcels of land were reserved for military purposes. Its boundary to the north is located within the San Pedro Makati estate. The east boundary is located in Taguig and Laguna de Bay, and the west boundary is also part of Taguig. As the AFP grew, communities surrounding Fort Bonifacio also grew alongside it. Military men started to establish the enlisted men's barrios or embos around the camp. Sembo, Pembo, Rembo, Comembo, we've heard of these areas, girls. And Sembo actually means Central Enlisted Men's Barrio, while Pembo means the Panthers Enlisted Men's Barrio. Now, these areas were initially reserved for housing of members of the AFP special units.
Now, as time went by, presidents started to divide the land for military reservations and distributed them to different cities. For example, Presidential Proclamations 2475 and 518 transferred some portions of the military reservation to Makati. But in 1993, Taguig questioned this move in court. Taguig called to put a stop to these presidential proclamations, filing charges against the Makati government, then Executive Secretary Tito Gingona, and others. Their argument: a presidential proclamation is not enough to change the boundaries of the cities surrounding Fort Bonifacio. They cited Article 10, Section 10 of the Constitution, which noted that no LGU or barangay may be created or divided without a plebiscite in the affected local units. Fast forward to 2011, the Pasig RTC ruled in favor of Taguig and declared the proclamations as unconstitutional. In April of last year, the 3rd Division of the Supreme Court upheld this decision, something that was finalized this week.
Bakit
very
nga ba
convoluted
pinagagawa, ano?
case.
Kanina I was
Yeah.
searching the populations of the embos. Nakita ko, it was 25% pala of the population of Makati. O
So
kaya
it's
pala,
vote-rich.
Yes. And UMAC,
And
University of
OSMAC.
Makati, OSMAC, they're part of that.
So that's going to be hard. I mean,
So
you can transfer the constituents, but what happens to OSMAC, the public hospital, and University of Makati?
Well, if they're within the boundary, then they will follow wherever the embos go. And by the way, I'm from Taguig, and I never knew that's what it stood for. Central
Oo
Enlisted
nga eh,
Men's
yeah.
Barrio.
They're all embos or
Sembo.
enlisted
Akala ko they're
men's
from,
barrios.
akala ko they're amalgamation of Tagalog words. Ayun pala, Riverside Enlisted Men's
Well,
Barrio.
you
Again,
know,
Today I learned.
we inherited that from the Americans,
Pag
right?
pinapili kaya sila kung sino pipili na, Taguig o Makati, pwede ba yan?
Pero hindi lang yun. So,
Kailangan mag-plebiscite.
Ayun,
We were just,
yun,
as we
yun.
were
Yes,
just
yes,
reading.
yes.
But,
so yun nga, yung problema ngayon kasi Fort Bonifacio is like a premier piece of real estate. It's worth a lot of money and it generates a lot of money as well. Doon naman sa mga gilid, di ba, yung mga embo, vote rich nga.
And that's exactly the two reasons why this is such a heated discussion. Well, not discussion. It's a case that's been dragged out for decades and is so, they're still fighting over it because of the votes and because of the taxes.
So bakit nga ba natin to pinag-uusapan today? It's really because that social media post supposedly has engendered Makati City Mayor Abby Binay, and in an interview which I actually saw last week on Twitter, she did say na they're preparing for oral arguments. Napakamot ulo ako. Akala ko luma na yung post eh. Pero hindi, chinek ko, it was current. It was, I think,
It
June
was
8.
not from any of the mayors, right? The post.
No.
And not from anybody from government.
No, I think it was I believe it was from a journalist who was doing like an ambush interview, but recorded on video on a cell phone. And she said that they were preparing for oral arguments, but Supreme Court spokesperson Brian Hosaka has said, wala talaga.
Wala naman hearing that's scheduled regarding this case.
So again, we'll see. We will have to see.
Follow this case closely in the next few days.
Right, so for now, lipat muna tayo sa ibang storya. President Bongbong Marcos has approved the inclusion of single parents and breastfeeding mothers in the government's food stamp program, eyed for pilot implementation in July. The palace says the inclusion of single parents and breastfeeding moms will strengthen the first 1,000 days of a child, which is crucial in addressing stunting or pagkabansot through maternal nutrition and proper child feeding practices. Social Welfare Secretary Rex Gatchalian said that studies have shown that stunted growth begins even before some children reach daycare.
Ang problema natin is yung first 1,000 days mula sa pagbubuntis hanggang sa pagpapasuso, yung lactating mothers, crucial yung period na yun kasi nga may mga studies that show na by the time na makarating sila ng daycare, yung stunting nangyari na. So, irreversible na. Ang paradigm shift natin sa administrasyon na to, kung kaya ko sabihin siguro, yung attacking the problem doon pa lang sa first 1,000 days.
All right, let's get some more details from the government's food stamp program. We have with us mobile journalist Julie Baiza. For more details, Julie, what do you have?
Regina, adding to the information mentioned earlier, Health Secretary Ted Herbosa said that about 1 in 5 Filipino children aged 0 to 23 months old and 28.7% of children below 5 years old are stunted. He said the DOH aims to cut these figures by half by 2028 or the end of the Marcos administration. With this, the pilot run of the food stamp program aims to cover 1 million of the poorest families. Target beneficiaries will receive food credits worth 3,000 pesos to purchase a select list of food commodities from DSWD accredited local retailers. Regina?
Thanks for that update, mobile journalist Julie Baiza. From social services, let's move on now to public works. The Lagos-Nilad underpass in the city of Manila has been closed off to give way for repairs. The rehabilitation of the underpass is expected to last 3 months until September. The Lagos-Nilad underpass was built back in 1960 and has since suffered considerable damage. The passageway usually floods after heavy rainfall, causing it to crack over time. Rehabilitation will cost around 75 million pesos. Motorists are now advised to take alternate routes for the meantime. Our news team was able to get some reactions about this. Let's listen in.
Dati, tulang kabilang nakasara, ngayon double na eh. Dagdag sa gas, malayo pa ikutan.
Ang rehabilitasyon kasi okay naman yun kung para pangkalahatan eh. Pero kung pang matagalan yung ganyan, hindi pwede yung ganyan.
Every time it rains, we do see photos of that underpass finally is getting some rehabilitation. Now, let's take a look at the traffic situation. On the other hand, over at the Lagos-Nilad underpass area, we have with us Brian Basa to give us an update. Brian, how's traffic?
Tiis-tiis daw muna, yan ang sabi ng Manila City Government. Inaasahan kasing usad pagong ang daloy ng trapiko dito sa paligid ng Lagos-Nilad underpass. Kanina, pinagmasdan natin ang paligid. Kanina namumula ang kalye dahil bumper to bumper ng traffic. Ngayon, medyo moderate to heavy ang lagay ng trapiko rito. Meron din tayong nakitang pila ng mga pasaherong gusto nang umuwi. Kaya bukod sa pasensya, paalala rin ng lokal na pamahalaan, merong alternate routes na pwedeng daanan ang mga motorista. Pwedeng dumiretso sa Padre Burgos, tapos kanan sa Round Table Park para makatawid sa Maria Orosa Street. Kaliwa sa Calao at kanan ulit para na makarating naman sa Taft Avenue. On track naman daw itong rehabilitation sa Lagos-Nilad underpass, so hopefully by September, back to normal na tayo. Gretchen?
Kailangan namin i-memorize yung sinabi mong directions. Maraming salamat. That was News 5's Brian Basa. Up next, some lawmakers are proposing to require the U.S. to pay for its use of bases in the Philippines to help augment the pension funds of military and other uniformed personnel. More details on that when we return. Keep it here on One News. You're also watching the big story here on One News.
Alright guys, narinig niyo na ba to? Wala nang libre ngayon except opinion at judgment. Pero ito nga, at least 2 of our senators agree that the United States should be required to pay for using Philippine military bases. Senator Chis Escudero backed the proposal of Senator Bato de la Rosa to charge the U.S. for this. Escudero said the rent money can be used to augment the retirement fund of military and uniformed personnel. Some defense and foreign affairs analysts have since shared views that the U.S. stands to benefit more from its renewed military ties with the Philippines.
Here to help us analyze this issue, we have, of course, our go-to analyst on all things international, Richard Heydarian. He is a senior lecturer at the University of the Philippines Asian Center. Richard, good evening. Thanks for joining us again. Didiretsahin ko na. This proposal, what do you think of it? Are there actually countries charging the U.S. for the use of their bases?
Right. Good evening from BGC Taguig.
Sa
Last time I
Makati ba yan?
checked.
Makati or
nasa restaurant
Makati
lang
Taguig?
naman ako eh. I mean, at least one of those 2 senators is a lawyer, last time I checked. So sana naman medyo nagbasa tayo, no? As far as the EDCA itself is concerned, very clear dun sa Article 3. If you look at the paragraph 3, it says, given the mutuality of benefits, the parties agree that the Philippines shall make agreed locations available to the U.S. forces without rental or similar costs. So nandun na po yan sa agreement sa EDCA. Now, if you had any disagreement with it, sana noon pa lang, no? Nung nine-negotiate pa lang ng EDCA, or before ito ay ma-clear ng Supreme Court of the Philippines, dapat na-raise na yan. But by now, there's already the EDCA agreement. So I suggest our good senators to read first ano yung nandun sa agreement before making this kind of comments. I am not against getting more out of the Americans or any kind of alliances that we have. I am not against that per se. But what I'm saying here is that I'm not sure if this is empty posturing or really a substantive intervention when clearly tapos na usapan, andyan na yung agreement. And you think the Americans are just going to say, oh, of course, we're going to give you extra rentals even if the agreement says otherwise because you guys are so nice and so tough. So yun lang. I'm not sure if this is just performative.
Richard,
Endorsement, ex-deal lang.
Exactly. Yun yung sasabihin ko. May ex-deal na naman tayo,
Oo.
di ba? I mean, okay, some analysts have weighed in. I think even you, Richard, you obviously sometimes say na, America stands to gain more, but we're not going completely empty-handed here. We are getting some donations going towards our military modernization, right? AFP modernization. We're
Yeah.
getting some things out of that. So, would there be really any basis or goodwill na lang siguro? Parang, huy, pahingi naman ng rent. Baka sabihin ng US, sige, bigay na namin.
Right. Ako, actually, again, I raise that not because I'm against getting more out of or any of alliances. I'm raising that because I'm saying, andun na yung agreement. So sana magbasa tayo bago mag-ano tayo. But, having said that, I do advise our good senators, if they really want to get more out of our alliance with the U.S., to focus on, for instance, the foreign military financing of the U.S., yung so-called FMF. The Americans have been giving us around $100 million a year as an FMF. Now, that may sound a lot, but just to put things into perspective, there are countries in the Middle East who get billions of dollars every year, even if they're not facing something like a giant China. Ukraine last year, of course, it's an extreme situation, but they got $42 billion in military aid from the United States. So, $100 million is a little bit, alam niyo na, di ba? Medyo barya-barya yan when you put things into context. So, I am 100% for asking more from any of our alliances and partnerships. Pero sana naman, wag tayong mag-comment dun sa mga tapos ng usapan. This is a matter of negotiating on other fronts where we should get more out of our alliance. And at the same time, siguro yung mga Amerikano, kasi I think na-allocate lang sila ng $180 million. Yung mga EDCA sites na iba dyan, literally site lang. Alam mo, there's no camp, there's no building, nothing. So I think you need billions of dollars to develop those facilities if ever they want to build really massive facilities here, which I doubt. Mukhang on the cheap lahat yung mga nangyari dito. So my advice to the good senators is that maybe noon pa lang dapat sana nag-raise kayo ng comment or push for a new agreement totally with Americans, maybe an addendum or something new to the EDCA. Or as I said, on FMF and other parallel defense initiatives that we have the Americans, doon dapat sila mag-push for more.
Given what you said, sabi mo, medyo huli na nga. No? Why do you think our lawmakers agreed to this provision na rent-free given also the history of our bases and given the current state of geopolitics, how important the Philippines is. Also considering napaka-delikado, napaka-laki ng risk to have these bases near the areas of conflict, lalo na in Taiwan.
Right. Again, mahabang usapan sa Taiwan, I know we can have in our discussion that. Now, going back to this, my contention is, I agree with where senators like Senator Bato are coming from. Perhaps ang sense nila, yung EDCA ay medyo lopsided. I don't think it's just good for US, may benefits yan sa Philippines. Pero aminin natin, medyo lopsided siya. Bakit kamo? We know very well that nung una ni-negotiate natin ng EDCA, we're asking for other things. For instance, we're asking the Americans to lease some of their warships or submarines to the Philippines, but the Americans said no. So there are many indications that the Philippines wanted an EDCA that will bring more benefits to the Philippines, except, guys, wag natin kalimutan, kailan na-sign yung EDCA? 2014. Kailan siya na-negotiate? Right after nung Scarborough Shoal, Panatag Shoal situation. So medyo desperado tayo nung time na yan. Kaya bilang isang Pilipino, I would say, I feel na EDCA was negotiated under circumstances of semi-desperation. And that's why I agree that the EDCA is not an optimally negotiated agreement. But to come up with totally new additions out of nowhere, I'm not sure how that's going to make sense kasi na-sign na yung agreement na yan. Now, if the Senate is against it, then maybe they should push for other initiatives. Pero wag natin kalimutan na EDCA is not a treaty. It was not ratified by the Senate. Yung VFA po so this is still an executive agreement. So maybe they should pressure the government to come up with a new executive agreement with the United States.
So to summarize your advice, Richard, basa-basa muna bago mag-comment. We thank you for joining us again tonight. We'll speak
Although
to you.
tama yung intention. Yeah, yun lang. Basa muna and then mag-advise.
Gotta find a way to balance the equation, right?
Read the fine print first in English.
Yes,
All
yun
right.
lang.
Thanks again for joining
Salamat.
us, Richard Hidarian. We're going to pause for another quick break, but up next, volcanic unrest in Mount Mayon could last a few more months, according to experts. Will there be enough temporary shelters to house displaced residents? That and more when the big story returns.
You're still watching the big story here on One News. So we have some more time. What else do we have?
Well, of course, volcanoes. Mayon. We are tracking Mayon very closely. State volcanologists believe the volcano's latest activity could last a few more months. This is based on historical data. Latest activities of Mayon in 2018 and 2014 because...
So roughly every 5 years, more or less, there's some grumblings from Mayon. I think there was in the 90s like a 10-year, almost 10-year period. I'm saying this because I did talk to Dr. Paul Alanis. He is the resident volcanologist over at Mayon. And he's saying that I asked him, so, ibig ba sabihin, since it's been erupting quietly, na ganito na lang, maybe, long, slow, and drawn out? Or possible pa rin ba bigla?
Explosion
Yeah,
natin
yun ang
tawag
official
doon.
term, yes. A quiet explosion. So, ang sabi niya is, they're tracking the earthquakes, the quality.
The tremors.
The tremors, yeah. So, yun yung talaga tinitingnan natin. Because we always talk about dioxide emissions, sulfur dioxide emissions, and rockfall events. But they're looking mostly at the volcanic quakes.
Well, actually, over 14,000 residents are already in the evacuation centers, have been moved to the evacuation centers. The Albay LGU is expecting this number to climb now that the danger zone has been extended to a 7-kilometer radius. Some barangays within the danger zone have implemented forced evacuations, including Barangay Fidel Surtida. As of last night, lava from Mayon's crater has flowed down the mountain by at least 1 kilometer. More rockfall events have also been reported this morning.
Sa kasalukuyan po, patuloy pa rin yung pag-aalburuto ng Mayon Volcano. Patuloy pa rin yung pagdaloy or pagbaba ng mga lava flow.
Well, let's get the latest on the evacuation first from Elaine Fulgencio.
Reg, the common priority of the local government officials to address congestion, water supply, and the restroom issues in evacuation centers. Earlier today, boxes of food and medicine for evacuees have arrived from the United Arab Emirates. Some residents within the 7-kilometer danger zone are still refusing to evacuate as they do not want to leave their homes and livelihood. Meanwhile, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. is set to visit Albay tomorrow. Santo Domingo Mayor June Aguas wants to ask President Bongbong Marcos for support to provide permanent and safe relocation sites for evacuees. Reg?
Thanks so much for that update, Elaine Fulgencio.
I'm actually worried about the lahar flows more than anything. If this lasts a few months and it's
that's a good
typhoon
point.
season,
Yeah,
right?
it's rainy season.
Oo, and that could actually, parang feeling ko medyo na baka ma-underestimate natin, malayo yung lahar flow sa pwedeng marating yan. In 1991, umabot sa NLEX.
Yes.
And
Umabot
even
ng
Manila Bay, the
Pampanga.
riverways. So we have to prepare for that as well. And here's a heads up. For those that often pass through NLEX, speaking of, Metro Pacific Investment Corporation said that the Toll Regulatory Board has approved the proposed toll hike for the expressway. So how will the new rates look like? Now, under the new toll matrix, motorists traveling anywhere within the open system from Metro Manila to Marilao, Bulacan will pay an additional 7 pesos for Class 1 vehicles, 17 pesos for Class 2 vehicles, and 19 for Class 3 vehicles. These said adjustments would take effect on June 15. However, 2 senators are demanding an explanation from NLEX and the Toll Regulatory Board over the drastic toll hike. Senate Minority Leader Coco Pimentel said the toll hike is unjustified given the service it provides. Senate Public Services Panel Chairperson Senator Grace Poe, meanwhile, said it is high time that the government study dynamic pricing. For their part, the Toll Regulatory Board defended the move, saying it was time for the toll hike. This was the same sentiment shared by Finance Secretary Benjamin Jokno. In a statement, Jokno said the Marcos administration had to implement the steep increase in the NLEX toll rate to make up for the authorized periodic adjustments due in previous years. He added that the petitions were carefully studied and analyzed, as well as approved objectively and fairly.
Sa alinsunod po sa ating kontrata na pinasok with the NLEX Corporation, pwede po silang humiling ng adjustment of toll fees subject to the approval of TRB every 2 years. Pinroseso po itong naihaing petition ng NLEX at only recently were they able to get the approval of the TRB. Tutusin nga po, Sir Ted, kadahati nga lang po ang pinayagan ng ating tanggapan dito upang hindi naman po masyadong maapektuhan ang ating mga users.
Right before we go, time for our big picture. Of course, it's this photo of the Denver Nuggets winning their first ever NBA title, almost 5 decades. They won this earlier today after their Game 5 victory over the Miami Heat, 94-89. Look at that photo, confetti flying in Denver, the Nuggets sharing hugs while passing around the NBA championship trophy, which is their first title in exactly 47 NBA seasons. Denver superstar Nikola Jokic was named Finals MVP as a Serbian became the first player in history to lead the league in points, rebounds, and assists in a single postseason.
Serbia is having
galing.
its moment on the athletic stage because
That's
Novak
true.
Djokovic just won
23 Grand Slam
23
titles.
Grand Slam, the most ever in the history of tennis.
Pero huwag natin kakalimutan back here at home, meron din tayong mga nakamit, Gretchen.
Si EJ Obiena, na-break niya yung 6-meter.
That's right. What did he
He's
say? He joined the 6-meter
he's
club.
one of the elite pole vaulters now kasi 20 lang
24
sila in history.
24 lang sila ever, Reg. Na
Also broke his Asian record. So hopefully,
Tuloy-tuloy na
he's
to.
primed up for the Paris Olympics next year.
Might be another gold medal there, but that's it for the show tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in and good night.